Ladies and gentlemen, this is our weekly program, Diplomacy. I'm Rapahel heading the program for you. We'd like to wish you to have a beautiful stay with our program till the end. Today, I have one guest here with me. My guest today is Ambassador Rapahel Morav, Israel's ambassador to Ethiopia. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining me and welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting you to your platform. It's a real pleasure.
Well, to begin with, the Ethiopia and Israel relationship. How can you remind us the historical relationship of both countries?
So as you say, the historical relations, indeed, our two nations have maybe started their relations about 3,000 years ago with the famous visit of Queen Sheba in Israel, in Jerusalem, where she met with King Solomon. We have, it's written in the Bible and it's part of our faith and part of the Ethiopian faith. And since then we have long-lasting relations. Ethiopian Jews settled down in Ethiopia already about 2,000 years ago, even maybe more. And they were the first to adopt Christianity in Ethiopia. And today we have two nation states, Israel and Ethiopia, and we have established relations over about 70 years ago. And re-established 30 years ago because they were cut in 73. And the relations are basically very good at all the levels. First of all, as you know, the Prime Minister Abiy visited Israel last September. The President of the State of Israel visited Ethiopia in May 2018. We have a lot of exchanges. Israeli investors are exploring business opportunities in Ethiopia. We have cultural exchanges. And we have in Israel 150,000 Ethiopian Jews who are a bridge between the two countries and are an important element in these relations.
Well, I want to hear a little about the Ethiopian Jews or the Israeli community in Ethiopia and their history. Would you please remind us a lot?
So, as I mentioned, about over 2,000 years ago, after the conquest of Israel, the empire which is the northern part of Israel of today by the Assyrian, around the 7th century BC, Jews, tribes escaped to Egypt, and from Egypt probably arrived to Ethiopia and settled down. We don't know exactly when, but it's certainly over 2,000 years ago. And since then, there are very close relations with the local population. Some of them converted to Christianity when the Christianity arrived to Ethiopia in the 4th century. And there was a Jewish kingdom in Ethiopia, as you know, the Gideon Empire, till the 16th century, if I'm not wrong. And so the contact between the two people are very close and very bounded one in the other. And today you have Ethiopian Jews in Israel, you have still many Ethiopian Jews also here. And that makes the bridge between our two countries. They come here from Israel to discover their roots, to also to explore business opportunities. And of course, we have others who are visiting Israel.
Well, to be here, what the current, or how can we define the current bilateral relationship of both countries, and for the future, what kinds of activities are planned to be undertaken so as to strengthen this relationship for further?
So on the background of these close and friendly relations between our two nations and between our leaders and the two countries, we are much involved in the economic development of the country. Ethiopia wishes to become a middle-income economy by 2025, and we are much supporter and engaged in assisting the Ethiopian government on this. So we have close cooperation, especially in the field of agriculture, where Israel excel and Ethiopia still 80% of its population make a living of agriculture. So it's very important, first of all, to increase the productivity of the agricultural sector. Our flagship project is in the field of avocado. We have introduced avocado for export. It started 13 years ago, and now you have tens of thousands of smallholder farmers in Ethiopia growing varieties of avocado from Israel, and it is now exported to Europe. And actually the first cold shipment by train to Djibouti was the avocado fruits that were picked in the Amhara region. So that's one thing, but of course we are much involved also in the health sector. There's much to improve for the well-being of the Ethiopian population, and in education, and of course in innovation. That's something that again Israel excel and has a lot of experience. Israel is labeled the startup nation, and Ethiopia has the talents to become also an innovative economy, so we are in a much close cooperation on that. We have to set up the ecosystem for innovation, something that is not yet well established, and we are working with the Ministry of Innovation and Technology and other stakeholders on that.
Well, despite strengthening the relationship of both countries, what kinds of activities that the Israel Embassy in Ethiopia are engaged in, especially in participating in the community service programs and helping the needy people?
Well, on the background of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been much involved in humanitarian activities. We have made several shipments of medical equipment and PPE, as well as food and hygienic equipment for needy populations and communities here in Addis and also outside Addis, in Amhara and other regions. So that's of course on the background of the COVID-19, and we will continue because the combat against the pandemic is international one. We must join hands in this, and therefore we will continue to support Ethiopia in this combat.
Well, coming to the other sector, how do you share the commercial and trade relationship of both countries?
Well, the trade relations need to improve, I would say, but it's something that has to be developed also through investment. I'm more, let's say, engaged in encouraging investment between the two countries, because that's what will increase also the trade. But as a matter of fact, Israel is the second world buyer of Ethiopian sesame. So what we can buy, we buy. Coffee from Ethiopia is exported to the international coffee exchange in London, so we buy there the Ethiopian coffee. And from our side, we export mainly agricultural inputs such as irrigation equipments, hybrid seeds and other equipment for the agriculture. But as I said, there's still a lot to develop, I believe.
All right, Ambassador, in general, would you agree that the bilateral relationship between Ethiopia and Israel can be called an excellent right at the moment? And for the future, what should be improved?
So I agree with your definition that the relations are excellent. Nevertheless, we still are aiming for higher. So you can ask what can be higher if it's already excellent. But I think that we could do much more, let's say, to make these relations more strategic one. Okay, we both countries live in a challenging environment. Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa, Israel in the Middle East. So this can be maybe worked out to make it closer. And we face the same challenges such as international terrorism, cyber, and other challenges of this kind. So we could cooperate much more on that. That's what I would say. And to come back to the economic sector, I think that we could do maybe more in this period. Maybe it's more difficult because of the COVID-19, but once the pandemic will be over, I believe that we will be able to strengthen much more the economic relations. At least that is my aim. And last but not least, maybe also to work more on cultural exchanges between the two countries. We have excellent Israeli artists, also from Ethiopian origins, who could perform here, and there are excellent jazz and other artists in Ethiopia that could perform in Israel. So I would like to see much more of these exchanges in the future.
Well, that's so important. How do you express the reform in Ethiopia, and in what side the Israeli embassy in Ethiopia are assisting the reform?
So first of all, I would say that Israel is much supportive of the reform program of Prime Minister Abiy. First of all, the political reforms are very important for the future of this country. We believe that inclusive democracy is the way to develop and to become among others, a mid-income economy. And secondly, the economic reforms, the privatization, the making business much more easier, and to have a bureaucracy which is much more business friendly. That's something that needs to be tackled. So we are supportive, especially through the economic development and the economic reforms. And as I mentioned before, through our cooperation in development, in agriculture, and in other fields.
Well, in what developmental and investment sectors that the Israeli investors in Ethiopia are engaged in right now?
So right now we have mainly in the field of agriculture investment, which is rightly so, because so you have Israeli farms here producing, for example, strawberries. It was invented, or sorry, but not invented, but brought to Ethiopia by Israeli investors. It was an unknown fruit before. I mentioned avocado. You have farms of flowers. You have farms of aromatic herbs that were recently visited by the president of Eritrea when he visited Ethiopia along with Prime Minister Abiy. We have farms producing hybrid seeds as well. We have investment also in the marble sector. So you have in the region of Asosa a big Israeli investment in that. We have also in the field of construction. We have an Israeli company that is constructing the highway Mojo Awassa, and many others.
Well, Israel is the first level in nurturing avocado sector development in Ethiopia, and for the future, what kind of works are expected in developing this sector and even adding another development sector?
Now, after 13 years in the sector of avocado, I think that it's time to hand it over to the Ethiopian authorities, because the know-how is already here, the technology has been transferred. And as I said, commercially speaking, it's also now Ethiopia is also an exporter. So it's indeed a time to think of other sector to develop. We have been in discussions with the government about lowland wheat culture. I think that's something that is very interesting. The idea is to produce wheat as a substitute to imports through irrigation. And Israel in the field of irrigation is very advanced, so this is where we could come in and assist. We had already an expert delegation visiting Ethiopia and made a survey on that. And again, it's a bit stuck because of the pandemic, but once the situation will allow, we'll send more experts and we'll engage in a concrete program. The idea is to establish a center of excellence for wheat culture by irrigation, because we need to transfer the know-how and to demonstrate the technologies. So that's what we plan for the future. Another thing that we are looking into is the development of the aquaculture sector. Strangely enough, there are many lakes and rivers in Ethiopia, but the intake of fish in the Ethiopian nutrition is very, very low, even in African terms. So I think that there's no reason why Ethiopia, with this potential, would not develop an aquaculture sector of its own. So this is again something that we are thinking about the future cooperation.
Well, in 2016, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced a new African policy called Return to Africa. And then to expand its ties with states like Ethiopia and other parts of African countries. What's the status of the policy at this moment?
Well, we still continue to engage with as many African countries as possible. And actually, in these days, there are talks of renewing relations with Sudan, which is an important neighbor of Ethiopia. I don't have the details on that, but from what I learned from the press, it's quite imminent. And other countries with whom we have not yet re-established relations. It means mainly the Muslim countries, but I think after the renewal of the establishment of relations with the Emirates, which is the third Arab country that established relations with Israel, we will see more countries to come and to establish relations in Israel. Actually, there's no reason. We're not in conflict with any African country, so why not to have normal relations where we can really cooperate together for the benefit of both countries. So that's so this move actually especially in these days got a momentum with the renewal of the relations with the Emirates.
Well, how can you express the relationship of Israel with African Union?
Well, Israel was an observer of the Organization for the African Unity when it was established in the 60s and 70s. But then when the new organization, the African Union, was established, under the influence of Muammar Gaddafi at that time, he insisted that all observers shall be readmitted. And actually it was a way just to not to admit Israel as a partner of the organization. And so our status today is that we have excellent relations with over 40 African nations, but we do not have formal status vis-à-vis the African Union. I think that this is an abnormality that should be corrected. There's no reason that Israel would be the only country in the world that cannot partner with the African Union when we are so close and we have so much to contribute to Africa.
Well, during the meeting and the visit of Prime Minister of Ethiopia to Israel in Jerusalem with his counterpart, Ethiopian counterpart, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called for strengthening unity in security cooperation with Ethiopia. Is there any developments or after the visit?
There are developments. I'm not sure I can talk about them, but as I said, we face the same challenges. If it's terrorism, radical Islam, cyber, and also now a pandemic, it's also a world challenge that we both face. So there's a lot of cooperation that can be done in this aspect for the benefit of both countries.
Well, what's your country's stand in the long-time negotiation between Ethiopia and Egypt on the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, and for the future, what kind of suggestion can you suggest in order to solve the problem peacefully?
Well, I would not say that we are in a position to give any advice to Ethiopia or to Egypt or to Sudan about the GERD. I'm sure that the three countries are able and willing to solve the tension around the construction of the GERD through negotiations and direct dialogue. I think that's the proper way. Under the aegis of the African Union, it's also a very good idea because it's an African problem that should have an African solution. So basically, we are very favorable of this way to solve the conflict. I'm very pleased that the dam is now going toward its final stage of construction. It's going to be a game changer for the economic development of Ethiopia, and that's something that we're very much supportive. And we trust that an amicable solution for the use of the water and the management of the dam will be solved between the riparian countries.
Coming to the Israel and United Arab Emirates normalization of ties, and Israel, what would be the connotation for the rest of the world?
Well, it demonstrates that there's no reason not to establish relations with Israel. We have no conflict. We never had any conflict with the Emiratis, and actually we had unofficial good relations and good cooperation already several years before the establishment of the relations. And I think that should be the attitude. And if we don't, it doesn't mean that every country has to agree with everything that we do, and that's normal in international relations. But between friends, it's normal that there are sometimes these disagreements, and it's not a relation not to have any contact or any relations. So I think that's an important and strong message to the rest of the international community, that Israel is open to establish relations with any country, whatever is the religion or the ethnicity or the location. And that's something normal actually in international relations.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm almost close to into my questions. If you have a general message for the people and government of Ethiopia, you can.
I really hope that we'll have peace in this country, and really that all communities of Ethiopia will be able to share together the future, and through dialogue, if there are misunderstanding. I think that it's very important that we all tolerate each other and respect each other, and accept the beauty in the variety of this country.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for your kindness to have such a beautiful interview with us. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.
It has been a great pleasure to me. Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, this will bring us to the end of this new edition. I'm Rapahel Morav by hosting the program for you. Have a beautiful weekend.